Hello, welcome to Michelle Reads Books. Today we are looking at Chronicles of Avonlea by L.M. Montgomery, and this is kind of a continuation of the Anne of Green Gables series. So this is a collection of short stories, and just like further Chronicles of Avonlea, I'll be reading a summary of each story individually and then giving my reaction or my opinion after each individual story, because you can't give your opinion on the whole book until you've given your opinion on each story. That is my opinion. Anyway, so the first story is The Hurrying of Ludovic. Theodora Dix has been courted by Ludovic Speed for 20 years, but he has yet to propose. Anne Shirley hears her story and asks a young man she knows to come and pretend to court Theodora instead, in order to encourage Ludovic to finally propose to Theodora. What do I think of the story? It's cute. It's a pretty fast read. And it's one of those where you're like, all right, fine. Yeah, I mean, dating somebody for 20 years and you still don't have any like long-term plans, that's a bit much, isn't it? And it feels like Ludovic was just kind of at the point where he was complacent. He was happy to hang out with Theodora, but just, yeah, didn't really have any plans to go farther than that. And it's really kind of sad, you know? Like, why not? Why didn't you? And it wasn't until he realized that somebody else could be interested in Theodora himself that he realizes that it's important to actually kind of stake his claim in that sense, and finally proposes and they get married, even though they'd wanted to for years. Yeah, Theodora had turned 40 and they still weren't engaged. Yeah, they'd been together for 20 years. That's such a long time. So yeah, I get it. And it's kind of a cute story, so yeah, I don't mind that one. Old Lady Lloyd. Old Lady Lloyd is a proud woman who never admitted that her family had lost their money. She lives alone in the large house of her childhood and wears old silk dresses her mother had had, so everyone believes that she is wealthy. Her only major regret was her former beau, Richard Gray. She discovers that he had a daughter, Sylvia Gray, who is a very talented singer and wants to study music but cannot afford it. Old Lady Lloyd goes above and beyond, selling heirlooms precious to her and humbling herself by making up with a cousin in order to provide for Sylvia. This is quite a long story. It took over an hour to read, just this one story. And I feel like it's a bit frustrating. Like, I thought to myself, what would I do in this situation? I would have sold my house. Like, she was literally skipping meals because she didn't have enough money to buy more food than that. And like, yeah, wearing the old clothes that her mother had, okay, sure, that's fine. But skipping meals and insisting on paying the gardener, even though he said he would have done it for free if he had known that she was struggling so badly with money. Yeah, I would have sold my house. I'm sorry, but that's kind of the only solution to that. And then lived in a significantly smaller house, and then you'd have some money to live on. Like, I don't think that that's unreasonable. And yet she insisted on staying, and that's just not at all what I would have chosen. Her being kind to Sylvia is slightly stalkerish. It's a tiny bit creepy. And Sylvia figures out who is doing nice things for her. She's not stupid. Yeah, and she ends up postponing her education in music in order to stay with Old Lady Lloyd while she was sick, which was very kind of her. But it's, I don't know, it's so unnecessary. Like, a lot of the issues that Old Lady Lloyd had were so unnecessary that it was a bit frustrating to try and read that. And how she would like sell heirlooms and stuff in order to buy her a dress. Things like that. Like, is that really the best use of your money? I guess, if that's what she wanted to do. Anyway. Each in his own tongue. Reverend Stephen Leonard attempts to stifle his grandson Felix's gifted violin playing, which he sees as unholy. He forbids the talented Felix from performing any music at all except organ. Then he tries to comfort a sinful woman who is dying, but she doesn't understand the love of God and doesn't believe she can be forgiven. When she sees Felix, she begs him to play violin for her as her dying wish. Reverend Leonard allows it, and he realizes that music can be a way to communicate the love of God because the dying woman is finally comforted in her last moments. This story is absolutely beautiful. This is one of my favorite stories of all of the Chronicles of Avonlea, short stories. It's just such a beautiful story, and this idea that violin playing can be unholy because he had been playing some kind of worldly songs, little fiddler kinds of songs. But dude, the boy was 11 and he was so talented. Everybody wanted to hear him. Dude, if you had a grandson that was that talented, wouldn't you support it? But he didn't, because his father, the child's father, had been a violin player and wasn't very good with money and stuff like that, and didn't take care of his daughter and whatever. And so he had this prejudice against violin players, I guess. It's really silly to me. It's just silly. Anyway, so the reasons why, but I did really, really love the way it ended. It's very beautiful. Little Jocelyn. Auntie Nan acted as a foster mother to Jocelyn until she was eventually adopted by a relative, but she tried to keep in touch. The now famous Jocelyn returns to Prince Edward Island to perform a concert, and Auntie Nan, who is dying, wants to hear her sing once more. Unable to go to the concert, she thinks there is no hope. Her hired man, Jordan Sloane, takes it on himself to go tell Jocelyn about Auntie Nan and bring her back. This one I found a little bit sad, Auntie Nan absolutely adoring this child who had grown up so talented and famous, and then when she was nearby giving a concert, she didn't even think to let her know and to invite her to come. It's weird to me that Jocelyn was clearly not as attached to Auntie Nan as she was to her. And yet she talked about, at the end, she's like, oh, it was so lovely being here, and I'm sorry I haven't written back and stuff like that. It's well, why didn't you? It's a little bit one of those moments of did you really care about Auntie Nan, or are you just saying this now because you're seeing her in person? And then obviously Auntie Nan dies shortly thereafter, and so, that's kind of another trope that they have in these stories. The winning of Lucinda. Lucinda and Romney Penhallow have been engaged for years, but after a quarrel, Lucinda declares she will never speak to him again, and Romney says that he won't speak to her until she speaks first. They haven't spoken in 20 years. Then, due to unforeseen circumstances, Lucinda scolds him, breaking their silence. Romney immediately apologizes for his part in the quarrel, and they decide to marry. This one's really frustrating. You're what? And honestly, if you react like that to a quarrel, you shouldn't get married. And that is my opinion, because honestly, what happens the next quarrel you have? So now you are married, and then you quarrel again over something, and you don't speak for another 5 years. It could literally completely tear apart your family. And then you're still together, but you just don't speak to each other because you're both super stubborn. At that point, you can't be that stubborn. You can't be that stubborn if you're in a relationship. So that is my opinion. I think that this relationship is doomed because of the mutual stubbornness and their unwillingness to yield, that they need the other person to apologize first. Yeah, that's my opinion. It's one of those okay, now they get married, live happily ever after. No. The next quarrel they have in, a couple of months, they won't speak for another 2-3 years, possibly longer, because that's just what they've gotten into, the rhythm that they've gotten into. Old Man Shaw's Girl. Old Man Shaw had a daughter, Sarah, who was returning home after her studies, and he is excited to see her again, setting everything up just how she remembered it. A vindictive neighbor said that Sarah won't be happy in the country anymore after living in town for so long. A joyful reunion follows, proving the neighbor to be wrong. This one's a sweet story. I really love how her father was, who married quite late and had children quite late, was so happy to have a daughter and just absolutely adored her and took such good care of her, and they were really close. And then this neighbor being like, she's not going to be happy here and everything looks so plain and blah, blah. And he's like, why? Why wouldn't she like it here? It's very innocent almost. And then Sarah coming home and being like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy, It's really sweet. Like, that's reality, And I really liked that story a lot. It's very heartwarming. Aunt Olivia's Beau. Olivia Sterling is a very neat and tidy, prim and proper woman. She tells her nieces that her old beau is returning from the West after a 20-year absence and will be courting her. His name is Malcolm McPherson, and big, loud, kind, thoughtful, and messy. Basically the opposite of Aunt Olivia. Olivia then has to decide if she really wants to marry him or not. And she goes back and forth. At one point she decides no, and he apologizes for what he's doing and asks her what he can change to make it better. And see, the thing is, Malcolm was very open to the possibility of changing and to try and meet her halfway if she would just give him feedback. But she refused, thinking that he should just know. And that's what I don't like about the story. Olivia, you need to be communicative. If it bothers you that he's messy and that he leaves his boots on the floor and tracks in mud into your house, then tell him this and ask him to leave his boots at the door. That's all you have to do. It's really not a big deal. But she's just very avoidant of all confrontation, and that's annoying. And then eventually she has to kind of like go and stop him in a very dramatic moment. And so I find it very trope-ish and not very, I don't know, practical. Quarantine at Alexander Abraham's. Angelina Peter McPherson hates men, but decides to check up on her Sunday school pupil at Alexander Abraham Bennett's house. In so doing, she gets exposed to smallpox, causing both Peter and Alexander to be quarantined together. Alexander hates women as well. Peter remains healthy, but Alexander contracts smallpox, and Peter decides to nurse him through his illness. Feelings develop between the two, and Alexander refuses to call her Peter, insisting on calling her Angelina, and they begin courting. This one is a tiny bit queer-coded. It's really interesting. I didn't realize that would happen, but the woman's name is Angelina Peter McPherson. Angelina Peter. And she goes by her middle name Peter because she thinks Angelina is too feminine. She's a bit either non-binary or possibly even a trans man. And it's not clear to me which. It's not. And also having Alexander like going back and being like, no, it's, I really like you and I hate women, but like, I like you. I mean, that's queer coded for sure. Like if it's like, okay, if you're a trans man, then I like you because you're a trans man. You're not like other girls, you're not feminine, So in my head, she is like Angelina Peter is a trans man that goes by Peter. And it is slightly confusing because then you're not sure, and they do gender Peter femininely, which I don't necessarily feel is correct. However, they didn't have language for that at the time. Interesting, though, that this was written in like the 1930s, and people claim that there were no trans people back then. There absolutely were. Look at this. This is crazy. And I really like that was kind of tossed in there. So in my head canon is that Alexander is pansexual and he likes Peter as like an exception to what he usually likes. But like I said, he hates women in general, so being very misogynistic, and so liking a trans man would be appropriate. So it is very, very queer coded. It's very interesting. I did like the story, but I don't like the ending with him, with Alexander saying, "No, I'm going to call you Angelina." And dude, like, no. Chosen names are a thing. You can absolutely call them Peter. Peter is the name that they go by. Anyway, Pa Sloane's purchase. Pa Sloane is well known as loving to buy random things at auction. He attends an auction and ends up purchasing a baby, which was initially put on the auction block as a joke after all the deceased family's belongings had been sold. The Sloanes decide to keep the baby and raise him. I think this is funny. It's just a sign of a community being willing to come together in order to protect and help a baby who needs support. So I just liked that they were willing to do that. The courting of Prissy Strong. Stephen Clark wants to court Prissy Strong, but her sister Emmeline is against it. She locks her sister in her room to stop them from being together. Eventually, Stephen comes over with a preacher to marry Prissy through the window when Emmeline was away. This is one of those stories where I'm like, why wasn't the police involved? I'm not kidding. Like Emmeline is not allowed to just lock her sister in her room. You're not allowed to leave the house because you have a boyfriend? Like, excuse me? Like, it absolutely raises my, every feeling of my body and being like, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Like, it's not okay in anybody's handbook, but it does show that at the time, people had a lot more power over each other than they have today. But yeah, I would have called the police immediately. Did they not have some sort of equivalent? I'm just saying. Anyway, the miracle at Carmody. Judith Marsh famously doesn't believe in God. She lost her faith in God when her sister Salome had been in an accident that made it painful and difficult to walk. The two sisters were trying to raise the orphan Lionel Hezekiah. Salome insists that Lionel needs to go to church, but Judith refuses to take him. Salome is determined to go alone. While at church, however, she sees Lionel fall and immediately runs home, running for the first time in years. And so that's the miracle, is that she's actually able to walk. It turned out her injuries weren't permanent, but she needed some physical therapy to try and, be able to walk again properly. Anyway, what I think of that, it's okay. It's not my favorite story. I feel like Salome is very submissive and finally gets a determination to do this. And the moral of the story is, you must believe in God because God doesn't make these bad things happen and whatever. But dude, if somebody has that feeling, then I think that's a legitimate feeling, and I don't think that they should be criticized for it. Of course they're upset. Why wouldn't you be upset? All right, the end of a quarrel. Nancy Rogerson returns back to Prince Edward Island after an absence of 20 years. She goes out to pick strawberries one day and decides to look over Peter Wright's farm, the man she had been engaged to years ago but had broken up with because of his bad grammar. She is appalled at the state of his home, which is filthy, so she breaks in and cleans the house, making a nice meal for him. He returns before she's finished and invites her to stay. Breaks up because of bad grammar. I think that's pretty petty, not gonna lie. So I don't love the quarrel itself and how very, very petty it is. So, yeah, I feel like it's a bit much. Also, her breaking into his house to clean it is a little bit yikes. Dude, that's kind of not okay either. Like, I know you had good intentions, but you don't do this. Don't do this. Anyways, but yeah, that's just my opinion. Also, I sense a theme through like half of the stories being like after a separation of 20 years, they get back together. It's 15 or 20. It's pretty much always like that. And I don't love it. I don't love it. I feel like that doesn't usually work out. The reason you broke up in the first place is still there. You just have to decide if that's a deal breaker for you. And if it is, then it is. That's just the way it is. I think the queer coded story was really interesting. I wasn't expecting it. Um, Very, very fascinating. But yeah, there were a couple of frustrating ones and then one or two really beautiful stories in between. So, all in all, I would say if you're a fan of Anne of Green Gables and you really like to read stories by L.M. Montgomery, then absolutely go for it. And I think that it's worth it to read. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. It took me about 5.5 hours to read the whole book. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and happy reading.